this week, a legendary NHL broadcaster, Doc Emrick. We didn't get to see him quite as much up here as I did down in the States, but he retired after a long, long career. But it got me thinking, were the old hockey broadcasters, play-by-play guys way better, as it seems in my head, or is that just a romanticized notion of our youth? Let's dive down that rabbit hole. Steve Milton, when I hear Dick Irvin's voice, for example, I immediately feel like I'm in the Montreal Forum because of the days when I was growing up and he would come on Hockey Night in Canada, and that burned into me. And Rick Jenneret, another guy, you hear his voice and you feel like you can smell the beef on weck at the Buffalo Arena. Are the old guys better? Or is that just because that's who we remember as kids and the new guys are far better play-by-play guys than the old ones ever were?
Well, it changes by time, and it changes by who you are. Of course, a lot is fixed in there. Go to your favorite music, and you usually get locked in an era when it's influenced you the most. You may appreciate certain music past that, but what your go-to thing is usually that thing that, and it's at different ages for different people, right? It might be teens for somebody, in college when you're going wild, for other people when you're going through certain rough times in music. So if you apply it that way, because it's still an essential thing, it's more about your interpretation of and what you were going through, but it's also because things have changed. The thing about Doc Emrick, he was an old style guy. He called TV by the radio. He broke Vin Scully's golden rule, and I'd read that somewhere, which is you in radio you punch, which Emrick did, and in TV you counterpunch. And it's changing and changing and changing and changing for TV because there's so much going on TV now. It's so advanced. The voice carried it so much more in earlier times. That's what I'll say to that.
Bubba, let's head down to the bottom row here, to the broadcaster row. The guys know this. Bubba, what do you think?
Well, and it's funny that you bring that up, Steve, because it's true. I mean, broadcasters nowadays, and I would say over the last 2 generations, have been taught that because we can see with our eyes on television, we don't need as much verbal description. Whereas I believe a lot of the older guys just called it like a radio broadcast. And I think that brought that sort of crescendo of excitement where we're more reliant on almost a post call from the newer guys. And I'll talk personally, I prefer the radio style call. I need to be generated with excitement. I need to feel that crack of a check in the corner, and then the development of a play, whether I'm seeing it or not. And that's why I'll always prefer the older guys. Doc Emrick certainly falls in that category. Unfortunately for me, not my favorite American broadcaster in terms of hockey. I always thought Dan Kelly was maybe a little bit better than him. That's just me personally, but I do give Doc credit because you don't last that long in any league without being real good at your trade.
Broadcaster number 2?
Yeah, what do Doc Emrick, Bob Cole, Foster Hewitt, Danny Gallivan, Vin Scully, even Bob Costas, Al Michaels, the greats of the greats, what do they have in common? They all have a unique sound to them. They're not all the same. And there's, I don't want to say a cookie cutter approach to broadcasting nowadays, but I think they're more reliant on the same things. When you go down the list of the guys that I just mentioned, they all have that unique call or that unique presence. As soon as you tuned into a game and it was Leafs Habs on a Saturday night and Bob Cole was calling it, you knew what you were getting. Nowadays, you kind of know what you're getting, but it doesn't have that same kind of feel. You didn't have the ticker on the bottom of the screen or the scoreboard or the shots on goal, and those commentators would bring all that information to you. So, yeah, they're the best of the best, in my opinion.
It seems that, and this is not a knock. I mean, look, the guys who do play-by-play and the women who do play-by-play now are great at what they do. There's no question. But it seems like somehow it's more technical. Back then, it just seemed like it was more, let it rip. Let's see what happens and say what you want to say. And it just seemed more less constructed, less pre-thought. Just show up and call the game, and what happens, happens. And Ricky, let's go back to you for a second here, because everyone except for me on this panel has done play-by-play at one time or another. I've done it only playing road hockey in my driveway when I was for my
hey, that counts.
But I mean, you've done it. You called the Ticats for a number of years. Is there a lot of oversight of people who get into it now to say, man, you got to come up with a tagline signature call. You've got to have something that's going to make you, or do they say, you know what, Rick, go do it, be who you are, and let's see where this thing goes? How much oversight do you get now?
I think it's important to be yourself, because if you're not yourself, you're not going to be able to tell the story that is unfolding in front of you. And if you're trying to pretend to be someone else, no matter what the profession, you're not going to be your best. And yeah, you might get, a tagline or two or a catchphrase that kind of just evolves with how you're calling the game or how a season is unfolding. That I think should come naturally. There should never be anything scripted or anything kind of prejudged or predetermined, especially when you're calling a game that you don't know how it's going to unfold. So my recommendation to any up-and-coming play-by-play or aspiring play-by-play announcer is be yourself and just let it flow. Don't have anything predetermined.
Bubba, let me say for Rick's point there, the key word I think that he just said is evolve, and that may be what we're talking about here. That it seems like a lot of people now probably sit at home in front of a mirror and try 100 different goal calls or touchdown calls or home run calls to come up with a thing. Whereas the old ones, it seemed like that's just what popped out of their mouth.
Well, I don't know. We might be now slipping into the romanticizing thing here.
Maybe.
I don't know too many play-by-play guys that don't pre-think a couple of things here. That if a certain situation comes up, what will I say? I mean, I can think of watching a special with Chris Cuthbert, and he thought about if he thought about this, if Canada and United States go into the overtime, which they did in the Olympics, what will I say? Now that Sidney Crosby, the golden goal, he actually admitted to saying, I will say the golden goal to whoever scores the goal. So I do think there are situations, and I think it's only natural because there are so many things that can come up in a hockey game, especially because it's so quick, that you will construct things in your brain. Maybe if this happens, I might say this. You may get it right at the moment, and then sometimes you may not. You may muff it at the moment because, again, things happen so quick. But I do think, and I know I can be guilty of that, because I've done basketball, I've done hockey, and I've done football. And there are some predetermined calls that I've had in my head.
Anecdotally, I'll add to that one, Bob. That's a really good observation because you can force those things if you. And I agree with Scott though too. I think a lot of young people are coming in right away with a goodbye, Mr. Spalding. I mean that's not it, but looking for something like that. But I'll give you an example of Tom Cheek. When they won in '92, Tom Cheek spent most of '93 at moaning about the fact that he didn't have a good call for when the Jays won the first World Series. He didn't have a definitive call by that time. I think he was always really worried. I mean, given Tom, he loves to express himself about those kinds of worries. So now '93 comes along and Joe Carter hits that home run. There's no way he's prepared for who it is in that situation or anything like that. And he comes up with touch 'em all, Joe. Right. He comes up with it on the second. It's funny because he spent a whole year worrying about something he felt he should have been prepared for because you knew if they won, it was going to be their first World Series, at least get that in. And he didn't come up with, he was good. It was a good final call, but it wasn't one of those memorable ones. And then when he has no preparation, he comes up with probably the second greatest call in most memorable call in Canadian sports history after Henderson has scored for Canada. So that's that kind of thing. I want to say one thing about the Doc Emmerich, who I don't think was the best. I agree with, he wasn't my favorite guy doing hockey in the States. I think Kenny Albert, who's probably going to be his successor, is better. Mm-hmm. And Dan Kelly was astounding. But one thing I'll say about
Al Michaels.
And Al Michaels as well, yes. One thing I'll say about Michaels secondarily, but Vin Scully, Danny Gallivan, and Emmerich control the language, using words that nobody else used. Nobody else had and Michaels to a secondary degree had the use of verbs. They once counted over 150 different verbs that Emmerich used in a game. And Vin Scully was incredible at verbs. And Danny Gallivan, I remember he used to I still know what ubiquitous means and indefatigable because of Danny Gallivan.
Steve, you say verbs and 100 verbs or whatever. I tell the story because I think you did play-by-play one time and you gave 100 verbs in 1 minute.
I hope my boss, Jeff Day, who's the sports editor at the Spec, is watching this, because generally we were the play-by-play team. He did the play-by-play, I did the color, just for playoffs back in the old, what we used to call Tier 2 Junior A, which it now just called Junior A, and it really had great teams. So, but they didn't have the money to send both of us out west when they went to, in the 1984 Centennial Cup. And so I did the whole game by myself. But Jeff, and I'd never done play-by-play before, Jeff taped it. And he still has it, and he played it in the Spectator newsroom one day, of the most words ever said in 30 seconds. I described everything, end to end, who was standing where, who the ushers were, and what the crowd had on. So it's an art. And I didn't have that art.
And Rick, that, it says something, and it's like, Steve's not a play-by-play guy by, naturally. That's not what he has done. That's not his career, and it really is an art. It's really hard to do, but it also says something. We talk about the old guys versus the new guys. We can name all the old guys because there were so few of them.
Right.
We saw them all the time. I would defy you to name 5 play-by-play guys from, and you can combine the leagues. You can do NHL, MLB, NBA, and take out Toronto because they're the ones we see. Name 5 play-by-play people for any of the other teams in any of the leagues. I bet you couldn't do it, because it's not the same as those guys who had the national platform and did it all the time.
And, the big difference too is, a lot of the guys that we've been talking about were there or have been there for years. Like Doc has done it for 50 years. Vin Scully over 50 years. Mel Allen, for years and years and years. Bob Cole as well. Like all these guys did it for so long because they were so good and they had a great following. I think they loved the game. They told great stories. They brought us into the broadcast booth and we listened to their stories and calling the game, whether it was hockey or baseball or football or whatever the case was. And it was, there is a bit of a romantic feeling because, those calls are associated with those, big goals and big moments when you're a teenager or a little kid watching the Leafs or whatever your favorite team is. And you associate that moment with that play-by-play announcer. And, we kind of hold that to our chest for years and years.
With that said, though, did many of the old-time guys hang around too long? And here's my counter to all of this, is that it's unfortunate because we've said words romanticize, fall in love, comfort zone. These older guys are all of that for us, no matter the sport. And yet what happens is that like every one of us, we become not as good as what we used to do. And I think some of these older guys have fallen in that category. And I think what really makes a problem is that whoever precedes that older guy is always in a very, very tough situation, because it's difficult to hear the new voice. Here's a perfect example to me. 20 years ago, Joe Buck might have been the most criticized play-by-play broadcaster we could know. Now,
I think he still is.
You know what, though? He's gaining a lot of popularity now for people that now are used to hearing that voice, because now it's been over a certain amount of time and we can't imagine hearing any other voice. So sometimes I wonder if the hardest thing to do is to be the new play-by-play broadcaster.
Well, I think that's true. And one of the things about that, Bubba, to extend that, is that playoffs aside, because those now you tend to focus, it's just on whatever's on that night. But most of the time, it's on many, many different platforms and many, many different networks. There's so many new sport networks, so many people, particularly in the NFL, that want a piece of the action. But you also see it in hockey where it's split up between TSN and then also regional and local. So even in our case in Toronto, you get several different announcers on TV for the Leafs, and always just Joe Bowen on the radio, but sometimes not him, because sometimes there was a period there where he did some TV work, right? And somebody else filled in on the radio. And there are more games, they're carried elsewhere. So you've got this whole smattering, but that is the way, to speak to your point, of things have been changing for a younger demographic anyways, because they're used to that scattershot types of thing. And maybe they don't need that. Maybe they don't need Joe Buck covering every single game, or even Joe Bowen covering every single game. Maybe they don't need that familiarity because they're in a switch around mode, and we are in a switch around mode anyways. There could be 3 hockey games on one night available to the same person.
Is that a cannonading slap shot?
That was, yeah.
something.
That
That was my age, being too old for what we're doing here. Talking
that was
with
a
hands.
Miltonian fumble-rama.
That's right.
No, and to follow on that point, back in 1972 during the Canada-Russia series, everybody watched TV, so everybody heard
Foster
Hewitt's call. And it wasn't until years and years and years later, because I was very young at that time, it wasn't until years later that I heard the radio call from that game that nobody remembers. Bob Cole did the radio. Never heard it before, but it shows you because so many teams and so many guys have such a control or a monopoly on their market that other people are doing stuff that we don't even necessarily know about. And one other thing about this that we should point out is we're talking about the romantic notion of these old guys, and they were all guys at the time, who were doing this great job. There were terrible guys back in the day too. There were some terrible, terrible broadcasters. I remember hearing a story from a friend. I won't say who he was or where because I don't want to embarrass anyone right now. But he used to cover junior hockey, and the play-by-play announcer in that town for a well-regarded, well-known team was just an absolute sloppy drunk who would show up drunk every single game, and one time almost fell out of the press box. You know, it's not all glorious. And even Harry Carey. Was Harry Carey really a good broadcaster, or was he just a bit of a joke and a bit of a funny thing because he was quirky? Was he real? Would you say Harry Carey was tremendous? I don't know.
He was also quirky, and also the Cubs were quirky because they played in the daytime, right? Which was weird all those years.
Yeah, he was a character, and I think nothing more. I don't think anyone would rank him as the all-time best play-by-play or even baseball play-by-play guys, but he was certainly a character.
And everyone knew him.
Yeah,
Bubba, if you were not Harry Carey, but you tried to be Harry Carey and you showed up and sounded drunk on a broadcast today, what would they do to you? What would your bosses do? Honestly,
you wouldn't stand a chance, though. But you know what? Therein lies the local broadcaster, though, right? I mean, because locally you can fall in love with a guy. I've heard many people outside of this market that can't stand Joe Bowen. Now, because it's a homer kind of call, right? I can think of the other guy. We're thinking about baseball. The other guy in Chicago, Harrelson, I believe was his name.
Ken Harrelson. Yeah, Ken Harrelson.
It was always us and we.
They can't stand that call. They think it's so amateurish, though. But for fans of the White Sox, that's their comfort level, though, right? Going back to that word and that phrase again.
Isn't that funny? In Chicago, which is a very sophisticated sports town.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a tremendous sports town. That those are the two baseball teams, and that's what they had, right? And they were concurrent as well.
Just as we wrap up here, and I'll give you time to think about it. I'll go first, so you each have a few seconds to think about this. I was going to say, what is the best call, the best standard call? I don't mean like touch them all, which was an off the cuff, made it up on the fly. The best tradition. I mean, and I don't know how you argue against He Shoots, He Scores by Foster Hewitt, because it's just so pure and so perfect and so concise and everything else. But Bubba, what's the best call that a guy has typically out there? Or has had?
I don't know if there's a call, because I can't think of a catchphrase right now that really bites to me right now, but I think it's just more of the overall product. And I think right now, and I guess Sportsnet would be very busy, very lucky to have him, and I think it's a big loss for the CFL, is Chris Cuthbert. Concise, fair. I never see him as much of a homer, and I feel like he can still build to the occasion. Very much like Danny Gallivan. Never so great. The call was always at this level in the first period, this level in the second, and in the third he could blow you over the top. And I think Chris Cuthbert has mastered that.
Rick?
Yeah, for me, it's, do you believe in miracles? Al Michaels and, the U.S. beating Russia, like one of the most iconic calls in the history of humankind. It's just, it will stick with humanity forever and ever. It was such a great moment and such an amazing call.
Yeah, and that one, was, he thought about that a little one, but who knew? Who really knew that they were going to beat the Russians? I kind of like, and I can't argue with he shoots, he scores. I kind of liked Goodbye, Mr. Spalding too. I mean, it was contrived, but it became such a thing, and then everybody else tried to look for a home run call around. There's one that I'll say that goes way, way, way back, and it's regional. And these games used to come into this market. Bob Prince, when he was calling the Pirates, those games used to come in on the Erie channel into this market, and a bloop and a blast. A bloop and a blast, right? That was a Bob Prince call.
I'll tell you the worst one is get up ball, Buck Martinez, good broadcaster. Man, I wish he would dump that stupid thing. No, that every single time drives me insane.
Buck was looking for a call. There's looking for a catchphrase. Definitely on that one.
That one, anyway.
You know
before
what?
we go.
Sorry, just quickly, as we listen to the baseball playoffs, and this is just, again, a personal thing, I feel like Buck in the color seat is just far superior to the guy in the play-by-play.
He's a good broadcaster. He's a good broadcaster. I just hate that one call more than anything. Steve, before we go, and we are running, why don't you share your story about the man who got hit in the bum that you called from the broadcast booth? Was that not you, or something about his?
It was, but I don't remember. Oh, that's right. Yeah. He got Jeff Day again is doing the call, and I'm describing what happened because Jeff, it was the deflection off a guy's butt, and I said he scored that one with his defecatory apparatus, and Jeff couldn't talk for about a minute.
His defecatory apparatus. That's the first time those words have ever been uttered in a hockey game.
Pretty quick though. Yeah.
There's awesome. Really no other context that's going to work. There you go. An entire broadcast without a single Jeffrey Toobin episode. You're welcome. Folks, well, we hope anyway. Thanks for watching. Subscribe down below. Give us your comments. Our Twitter handles are on the screen. We'd love to hear from you. We'll do this again soon. Take care.